Hi, and welcome back to Marketplace Tech's limited series, Decoding Democracy, where we'll be exploring how technology is changing how we participate in the 2024 general election. I'm your host, Kimberly Adams, and today we'll be looking at the dangers of online misinformation that surfaces in the wake of natural disasters like Hurricane Helene and Milton, and examine how these misleading narratives are seeping into politics. So joining me to discuss this is Ethan Porter, professor of media, public affairs, and political science at George Washington University. Professor Porter, welcome to the show.
Great to be here.
So can you first go over some of these misleading or sometimes outright false narratives that we've been hearing out of these two devastating hurricanes?
Sure. So false claims have followed both hurricanes. False claims concerning the intention of FEMA actors, right? So there are claims circulating that FEMA is intent on destroying people and communities, that FEMA is part of a plan to remake American society. We're also seeing false claims circulating about just the nature of the storm itself, who caused it, who's responsible for it. Finally, we're seeing false claims about the details of these natural disasters, where it's affected, who's affected by it. So we're seeing a combination of false claims about the intention and sort of the plan of those who are overseeing these, and just false claims about the details of the disasters.
Another thing that seems to be supercharging some of this misinformation is the use of generative AI in creating some of these memes and things like that. Can you talk about that?
Sure, generative AI is relatively new. Anybody can use generative AI to make a meme, create text, create images. Many are created and many are distributed, and nobody pays attention to them, right? Nobody ever hears about them. It's just a few people sharing and a few people seeing. But given the sheer volume of generative AI created memes and false claims, some are going to break through and become viral. And the advantage that generative AI has over prior misinformation content is that it can visualize anything. So within the boundaries of what these programs do, you can visualize things that are outlandish, things that are, impugn the other political party, in turn make misinformation more vivid for consumers, more vivid for social media users. I don't want to overstate the dangers of generative AI. I don't want to say that nothing can be done, or I don't want to say that it's a whole new frontier, because as you surely know, misinformation has been with us for a while and has been sort of worrisome for a while too. But generative AI poses a new threat.
So many politicians in this cycle seemingly engaging in this particular kind of misinformation. What are some of the consequences?
Yeah, I think this is really important. What's new this time is that political leaders are embracing misinformation. They're sharing it, and the consequence of political leaders sharing misinformation is that some people believe that misinformation. Not everybody. Some misinformation is so outlandish that even people who are flattered by it, people whose political party might find it advantageous, reject it out of hand. But some people are pushed to extremism because of highly provocative and outlandish misinformation. As you may have heard, this past weekend, FEMA scaled back some of its efforts to deal with Hurricane Milton relief because extreme armed white nationalist groups in FEMA were hunting, or are said to be hunting, FEMA employees. Again, that's not the case for most people who see misinformation. Most people who see misinformation are not going to take up arms. But some people, a small but significant portion of the population, may indeed respond in that way, especially when political leaders endorse misinformation. Again, when it's just your aunt or uncle sharing misinfo, that's one thing. But when it's a political leader of the party you are very loyal to, that's going to change some people's calculus about how they're going to respond.
So, how can the average person sort of build up resiliency against this kind of misinformation, or what should they do when they encounter it?
The good news is average people can be confident that they themselves are likely not the ones who are most susceptible to misinformation. You as an average person are not going to fall victim to any misinfo you see. That said, there are a few things you can do. One, if you see misinformation being shared by a friend or relative, don't be afraid to call them out. Evidence has shown that actually that kind of like call out where you fact check somebody socially online, a friend, a relative, a neighbor, and say, hey, you're making this claim. That's not true. That actually works. Even though it might be uncomfortable, it actually does sort of disabuse people of false claims they may believe. So if you're an average, everyday person who isn't really affected by misinfo, don't be afraid to call it out. Two, try and think about holding political leaders responsible for spreading misinformation. If they're of your political party who are sharing misinfo, hold back your vote, hold back your fundraising dollar, try and get a price paid, right? Politicians pay a price for misinformation, and in some ways that's on you. There are still things you can do to sort of take a stand against misinfo.
Well, thank you so much, Ethan Porter, who is a professor of media, public affairs, and political science at George Washington University.
Thank you so much, Kimberly.
And thank you to everyone for joining us for another episode of Decoding Democracy. If you have any stories you'd like to share about voting in this election, we'd love to hear from you, so leave a comment below. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please like and subscribe. Daniel Shin produced this episode, and I'm Kimberly Adams.